I want to begin by thanking Branch 6 and President Davidson for hosting us this morning, and to the wonderful crew that served us breakfast. Many, many thanks. What a great way to start our day. And it feels particularly comfortable to be back at Branch 6 and to be back in the wonderful Annapolis Valley here in Kings Hants. This is very much my home. And David, you referenced family, friends, and a sense of belonging. And that's very much the way I feel about the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is a party I grew up in. It's a party I believe in. It's a party that has brought much to the country, and Nova Scotia has contributed mightily in that regard. Growing up, my two favorite people next to my family were Darrell Sittler and Bob Stanfield. So I always cheered for the blue team. And I am particularly happy to see the change that is occurring on the ground. There's a lot of blue signs that seem to be popping up like spring flowers out there. And as David alluded to, some people might think that he's a bit of an underdog in this campaign. I think David is going to outwork, outperform, and outpoll the other guy. And on May 2nd, we are going to see Kings Hants turn blue again. But he's only going to be able to do that with your help, because first and foremost, politics is a team sport. It's a team sport. We have a good team. We have a good leader. We have a good platform. We have a good record to run on. And one of those records that I am particularly proud of is that of the recovery and reinvestment and refurbishment of the Canadian Armed Forces. That is something that we as a party have embraced and performed well. One of the very first things that the Prime Minister asked me to do upon becoming Minister of National Defence was ensure that we were able to bring forward what was called the Canada First Defence Strategy. And those of you in the Legion, those of you with military service, or those with members of your family in the military know full well that, sadly, we saw a period of time where our military was underfunded, under-resourced, and quite frankly not given the attention, the respect, and the dignity that they deserved. In fact, one former Chief of the Defence Staff, General Hillier, called it a decade of darkness in which he had served. And we have shed the light now on the Canadian Forces. We have put in place a multi-billion-dollar, 20-year plan to see all of the major platforms of the Canadian Forces replaced and refurbished. Their infrastructure, where they train, where they live, where they prepare to do their duty. The personnel, of course, first and foremost, investing in people, giving them the necessary supports and programs that they need, and that of their families and our veterans. We've invested in new equipment, of course, some of which has become the subject of much discussion, and I'll come back to that. And we've also put in place readiness. That is, the ability of our Canadian Forces to respond adequately to the expectation that exists for our military when a crisis arises. And I'm not talking just about the classic military crisis. What we have in Canada that sets us apart as a military, and I would argue sets us apart as a country, is a country that cares. A military that understands their role in the world and is prepared to go and make a difference in a very real, substantive way. We saw it in Haiti. Haiti was perhaps one of the best examples in recent years of our military rolling out on very short notice. Within 24 hours, they were spooling up in Halifax Harbor and sending a frigate to Haiti to be able to go there and provide water and food and important medical supplies and relief to that country that was in such crisis. The same can be said of Afghanistan, because when we deployed from Kabul down to Kandahar, many, even in our own military, let alone the government of the day, didn't realize that this was going to be a full-blown combat mission. And do you know what is to our eternal shame as a country? And the Liberal government of the day sent our men and women in uniform to a desert combat mission in forest green uniforms and inadequate armored vehicles that had as much protection as a Volkswagen Rabbit. Shame. That type of under-resourcing can never happen again. We have to ensure that we give our military the necessary protection to do the important work that our country asks of them. And the protection of Canada, let's be frank, begins thousands of miles from our shores, in places like Afghanistan, from where the pilots who flew those planes into the Pentagon and into the Twin Towers were trained, in Afghanistan, where a terrorist government was ruling the country, where little girls were prevented from going to school, where people were daily oppressed and human rights were ignored. That was the state of affairs in Afghanistan when we arrived with our NATO UN partners in late 2001. And people ask me all the time, why are we there? Why are we in Afghanistan? What are we accomplishing? Well, if you remember no other fact that I'm about to tell you, remember this: there are now over 7 million children going to school in Afghanistan, and a third of them are young girls. Basic health care has improved. Infant mortality rates are down. We are immunizing children against polio where it was of epidemic proportions. We are providing clean water systems. We are providing agricultural support that now allows Afghanistan and Kandahar province in particular to grow more wheat than poppy. More wheat than poppy. Why is that important? Because it's less heroin on the streets of Canadian cities and cities around the world. They're growing pomegranate, beets, and barley and food supplies, not only for their own consumption but for export. They have an economy now where none existed. They have roads that connect villages that have never been connected. They have bridges, water systems. All of this has come about because of Canadian support, perseverance, and ingenuity, and security. Because first and foremost, what our military bring with their acumen and their attention to detail is security. Security that allows all of the aid and development and diplomacy to occur. Because without it, it's parched ground. They don't have the ability to do all of those important quality of life missions. Our military are there now doing what I consider to be also an incredibly important contribution, and that is training. Training their military, training their police to provide security. The Afghan National Security Forces have been the biggest success story of this mission. Do you ever hear about that? No. Will you read about that in the papers or on the news? Unfortunately, much of the success of the mission is overlooked. But our military are doing outstanding work on behalf of our country. Exceptional work that makes a huge difference and has, in my estimation, brought back Canada's well-deserved reputation in the world. And you know, I say this all the time because I believe it in my core to be true. Those who wear the uniform in our country are our best citizens, and I include police and firefighters and medical practitioners and those who put themselves voluntarily in harm's way to help others, who wear the uniform, who wear the flag of the Canadian Forces, who wear our provincial flag and uniform. Those people are set aside, set apart. You've heard the old expression, when people are running out of burning buildings, when people are running out of war-torn countries, those citizens of our country are running in. That's why they need our support. And that's why I'll take this opportunity for a slight diversion. That's why we have in our platform recognized the need to support volunteer firefighters in our country, giving modestly giving them tax breaks to help pay for their training, for their travel, for the endless hours that they put in volunteering to support and in many cases save homes and buildings in our communities, but they do much more than that. Our firefighters are coaches, they're teachers, they're business people. We need to recognize that type of service. We have outstanding people in our community that with this recognition, it's not only the monetary amount, it's a clear recognition. And so that's why I'm, again, very proud of the work that we've been doing in support of our military, but proud of some of the very practical, sensible, roll up the sleeves, to use David's expression, initiatives that we're bringing forward to help rural nurses and doctors, to give them support to pay off student debt and an enticement, encouragement to stay in rural communities where we need them. That's why I'm proud that we are doing more for seniors in this campaign, putting forward initiatives that will help them after they have done so much to build our country. We have initiatives that are there, of course, to encourage entrepreneurs, small business, because the business sector, the private sector, is what creates wealth, opportunities, keeps people in our province. As David knows well, as a former environment minister, having worked with natural resources, these primary industries remain the important anchor of our economy. And one of the most exciting initiatives I've seen literally in my lifetime, not only in politics, but as a Nova Scotian, as a Canadian, is this opportunity to harness clean, green, renewable energy from the lower Churchill Falls to bring low energy costs to Nova Scotia. This one project, with investment from the federal government and our provincial partners and the private sector, has the ability, the equivalent of taking 3.2 million cars off the road when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. That is a practical, sensible investment. This is a nation-building project. It shouldn't be seen as anything other than Nova Scotia's equivalent of the oil sands. This is an opportunity for a generation of Atlantic Canadians. That, coupled with the Atlantic Gateway Initiative that will bring these massive ships through Nova Scotia, improve our transportation and infrastructure. And you know, as you've seen, we've made significant investments in our province. Our government has been very good in recognizing the strategic importance of Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada. I, for one, am very proud to see many of the projects that are going on currently in Nova Scotia. New highways, new sports infrastructure, investments in our universities. One of our greatest assets, our education incubators in Nova Scotia, our universities and community colleges. No better school, no better example than Acadia University here in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. David knows that. He and his family are not only committed to this community, they're committed to the country. Did you know David has 3 sons serving in the Canadian Forces? And for that, I want to say thank you to he and Lynn. And he mentioned principle. I believe that we have taken a principled approach. We need to stay away from the personal side of politics, stay on the high road. My grandfather used to say, stay on the high road, you'll meet fewer people, but it's the place you have to be. And this is a campaign about ideas. It's a campaign about a vision for the country. We recognize that this is a volatile time. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. There's a lot of volatility in many parts of the world. I consider it to be a blessing, the good fortune to see what's happening in other parts of the world and how Canada is contributing mightily, but how fortunate we are as Canadians. I literally want to kiss the ground when I get off an aircraft sometime after having seen what's happening in parts of the world, in Japan, in war-torn countries, in times of natural disaster. We have so much to be thankful for, but so much more to do, because you've heard the expression, to whom much is given, much is expected. And the world needs more Canada. The world needs a country that's as generous and compassionate as ours, that's willing to reach out, and sometimes at great risk. And I am extremely proud, not only as Minister of National Defence, but as a Canadian, to see the response that has occurred. I would describe it as an awakening of awareness for what the Canadian Forces do in Canada. Because it's not only the away game, it's the home game. It's the necessity to protect our shores, the Arctic, the largest land mass, and to have the military equipment, personnel, and ability to do so. And that leads me to an important point. Why do we need 65 Joint Strike Fighter F-35 aircraft? The simple reason is this: we have an obligation to protect our country and our sovereignty and our people. We have an obligation through NORAD to protect the continent of North America. And of course, looking further afield through the United Nations, through NATO, we have to play our role, as we are currently doing in Libya. These are the best aircraft at the best price that will give our pilots and their families the best chance for them to return home safely, having completed their mission. This is an investment. This is an important investment at an important time. We need to put this money into the program over the next number of years to ensure we don't face an operational gap, because when the F-18 fighter aircraft can no longer fly around the year 2020, we need to ensure that we have aircraft to replace them. That's why these investments are occurring now. And here's a fact that you won't hear. The previous government has invested more in this program than we have at this point. Our major investment will start around the year 2016, when we start to receive these aircraft. This money is spread over 20 or 30 years to maintain the aircraft, which is the time frame that we've been flying the F-18s. These aircraft are now approaching 30 years of active service, and the airframes are tired. They have to be replaced. And when I hear Mr. Ignatieff or your local candidate or others saying, it's too much, we shouldn't be spending this money, or we'll cancel the program and replace it. Nonsense. That's a nightmare for the Canadian Forces. And guess what? We've heard this nightmare before. It's called the EH-101 Sea King replacement. Where a previous Liberal Prime Minister, as you remember, said, I'll take my pen and write 0 helicopters. And he did. It was Paul Martin's pen. And he replaced that contract, cost the country almost $1 billion. We're still flying we're 17 years later flying 50-year-old Sea King helicopters. And we can't see that type of blatant partisan politics interfere with the health and well-being and service of the Canadian Forces ever again. That is an abomination. If we're elected, we'll make that purchase. We'll provide those planes. And guess what? We'll provide more equipment, more ships, more armored vehicles, more personal protection for those men and women in uniform who do so much for our country and deserve the respect and admiration and investment of their federal government and their fellow Canadians. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you will spread the good word. Make the case for a re-elected Conservative government. Make the case for a newly elected Conservative candidate in King's Hands. We need David Morris in Ottawa. We need him as part of the Conservative team in Atlantic Canada and in Nova Scotia. We need an opportunity to go back to Ottawa, get some legislation in place that will improve our criminal justice system, get rid of the wasteful, ineffective long gun registry, and get on with the economy and running the country. We can get pulled off in lots of different directions over the next 2 weeks. The focus has to remain on the economy, on jobs, on what's good for Canadians, not the squabbling, not the bickering. You saw the debates. The Prime Minister is focused and on track. We need to ensure that we get our message out clearly and concisely to Canadians so they know where we stand. We know where the other guys are. We don't need to talk about them. Let's talk about what we intend to do for the country. And just one last story on this long gun registry, which has been with us for a long time. I was at a gun show the other day in Pictou, in my home constituency. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't have wanted to be carrying the banner of any other party when I went in there. There was a lot of guns and a lot of ammunition around. But seriously, there was a fellow from Cape Breton told me this story recently. We, of course, are known for hunting in many parts of our province, but no more so than the highlands of Cape Breton. And there were some Newfoundlanders who'd come over to hunt. And sure enough, they managed to bag a moose, as they say. And they had this moose. This was just this past Christmas, before Christmas. They were hauling him back to their half-ton truck by the hind quarters. They were struggling to get him through the heavy snow. And they met up with a couple of Cape Bretoners who were out hunting as well. And Cape Bretoners in Newfoundland really cut from the same cloth. Great, friendly people. They had a great yarn and shared a story or two with some hot tea and maybe something stronger. And sure enough, as they were parting ways, one of the Newfoundlanders said to his friend, you know, great to meet you fellas. Thanks so much. You know, can you give us some directions? They said, yep, just over that hill there. They'll get you back to the main road and you can find your truck. And one of the Cape Bretoners said, oh, and by the way, he said, I couldn't help but notice as we approached, you had that moose by the hind legs and you seem to be having a hard time. Now listen, boy, if you go over to the other end and take her by the antlers and you slides her along the grain of the hair, it'll be a heck of a lot easier, save you a lot of stress and strain. Away they went. One of the Newfoundlanders turned to his friend, he says, you know, George, these boys here in Cape Breton, awful smart, nice fellas. He says, and this is a heck of a lot easier. His buddy turned to him, he says, yes, Johnny, but we're getting further and further from the truck. So there's a lesson in there for us. We can be pulling hard and we can be pulling together, but we have to be going in the right direction. And I believe we are going in the right direction with David's leadership, with that of the Prime Minister. We have just over 2 weeks to go. Let's work hard, pull together, keep our focus, and on May 2nd, let's elect David Morris as the Conservative Member of Parliament for King's Hands. Thank you so much.